Hey, Browns fans, welcome to another edition of The Road to the Draft, presented by P&G and Meyer. Nathan Zegura alongside Andrew Gribble, and today we're going to look at the wide receiver position. While the Browns are running it back at wide receiver, basically exactly as they did a year ago, it's a position that maybe could come off the board earlier than some people think for the Browns, because you've got to look for speed, number one, but number two, succession planning, as there's likely to be some change and some turnover in this receiving core over the next couple of years. And so, Gribbs, when you think about the receivers on the roster now, you feel really good about it, but you see that there maybe is an opportunity to bring some speed, inject some of that, some youth and speed into that group, but also you got to pay attention to, what's coming down the road and be prepared for it.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, obviously have Jarvis and Odell, who it's as good of a 1-2 punch as you can have in the league. But again, those are guys that have both been in the league since 2014. And I think that you've got to keep your eye on that as you're building the team for the future. But then you look at Rashard Higgins, Kadarius Hodge, guys like that, they're on one-year deals with the team. And then you have Donovan Peoples-Jones is one of your only guys that's kind of locked up long-term with that 6th round contract that he signed last year. So I think when you're looking at this team for 2021, you're fine. And you almost look at the wide receiver class, you're like, who's a draft pick going to beat out in this wide receiver room to make this team this year? But like you said, planning for the future, and also perhaps adding a skill set that isn't quite there on this team right now, which is that traditional slot combination with also someone who can really stretch the field. So it's almost like you'd love to add like a Wes Welker and a Deshaun Jackson, like every other team would, but those are kind of the two skill sets you're looking to add here.
Yeah, this is a draft that I think, frankly, has a lot of guys who maybe have that complete combination that you just outlined. And so let's go through some of the names that could be there if the Browns were to jump at 26, or maybe they move back into the early second round or up into the early second round or stand pat in the second round. There are a lot of names. This is an incredibly deep wide receiver class. And, you're seeing a lot of evaluators that I've read about talk about 13 players with first or second round grades on their board at the wide receiver position. So this is a wide receiver rich draft. And we'll start with Rashad Bateman, 6 foot 190, a 4.4 40, great route runner, 1,700 yards, 13 touchdowns in his last 18 games, only played 5 last year after opting out. But he's a guy that maybe develops into a legit number 1, number 2 type receiver on the outside, Gribbs.
Yeah, and he's the one that is maybe the most ready to play right now, I think, in this group. Someone who, if he doesn't get drafted by the Browns at 26, he could go to someone like the Packers, and all of a sudden they've got a number 2 wide receiver to go alongside Devonta Adams. So this is a polished, traditional wide receiver that could make an immediate impact in a lot of places. But if he were to come to the Browns, maybe you would have to wait his turn behind some of these other guys. And, before you even mention Bateman, he's such a good wide receiver. When he initially tapped out, he was viewed as one of these top wide receivers in the draft. What you didn't mention is there's 3 or 4 wide receivers that are going to come off the board before you even get to 26, guys that we're not even talking about. I mean, that's how deep this wide receiver class is. And in a lot of other years, Rashad Bateman might be the number 1 guy, but there's just Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Those guys, they're going to be gone. So you're already getting these kind of top talented guys in the late first round, which is just reflective of what you're seeing through the rest of these 7 rounds.
Right. And you're right. We didn't mention those top 3. They will be long gone by the time the Browns are on the clock. Bateman, I think, very good. I'm not sure he fits, necessarily the upgrades or the traits the Browns need for 2021, but certainly would be somebody you're saying, yeah, down the road, we're projecting him as a starter. Now, guys who could do all of that are going to give you 3 names here in a row. Kadarius Toney out of Florida, Rondale Moore out of Purdue, and Elijah Moore out of Ole Miss. These guys are all not necessarily the biggest guys, 6 foot, 5'9", 5'9", but they fly. Toney 4.37, Elijah Moore 4.35 out of Ole Miss, Rondale Moore from Purdue a 4.31. And these are guys who can run out of the slot, who can take the top out of the defense, who are dangerous after the catch, who can also help in the return game. Toney last year was first-team All-SEC as a returner, second-team All-American, who had about 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. He can change direction. He's one of those guys that kind of looks like a highlight film. So does Elijah Moore. I mean, think about the numbers he put up last year in 8 games at Ole Miss: 86 catches, 1,193 yards, 8 touchdowns. He led the FBS with 11 catches and 149 yards per game. And I've seen Elijah Moore compared to Antonio Brown as a player comp, first team All-American, first team All-SEC. We'll get to Rondale Moore in a second, but let's start with those two, Toney and Moore, who are very, very dangerous.
Yeah, and with Elijah Moore, you've all of a sudden got to think of this instant pedigree that Ole Miss has with these wide receivers. I mean, DJ Metcalf and AJ Brown are two of the best wide receivers in the league, and this is someone that, again, a different type of skill set, but just they fed the ball to him in every possible way, and he delivered and kind of held up as well. And these two players, Elijah Moore and Kadarius Toney, they're not just going to get your wide receivers coach excited. They're going to get Mike Prefer excited on special teams, because you want to have this skill set, adding a dynamic return man to this team, which is something that simply just hasn't existed on this team for the last few years. I think you brought in JoJo Natson last year, but he got hurt, so you didn't really get to see what he could do last year. I like the versatility and the skill sets, and these are the guys that we're talking about, guys that are able to do things that players on this team doesn't really match that skill set. So that's where these guys, you might take a swing on these guys late in the first round, maybe moving up in the second round, because they do add an element to your offense that you currently don't have.
Yeah, another one is Rondale Moore, and everybody who watched the Ohio State game back in 2018 saw what he did at Purdue. 5'7", 181, 4'3", 140. Back in 2018 as a freshman, 114 catches, 1,258 yards, 12 touchdowns. He was the first Big Ten freshman receiver ever to be first-team All-American. But since then, he's only played 7 games due to injury in 2019, COVID last year. His player comp is Tyler Lockett from Lance Zierlein at NFL.com. They say he's competitive, fast, great breaks out of his routes, excellent after the catch, great character guy. 71% of his yards in college after the catch. So he is somebody who is elusive. You get the ball in his hands on those jet sweeps, a great punt returner as well. So he's another one of these kind of can do it all, undersized, but incredibly talented.
Yeah, he's going to be an interesting one, because talent there alone is first round easily. But I think there's just going to be a lot of stock taken into the injuries. And I think that you want to see these guys be able to be durable and hang on there. So there could be some real value in getting that kind of player maybe later than you think you might need to, be based on the injury history. I think that the medical checks that they did in Indianapolis, those will be very important. And just kind of watching him as a player, is he one of those guys that just plays super elite level, but you just want to keep him on the field? I mean, that's a valid concern, but again, could be a valuable pickup in the second round potentially for the Browns, because like you said, we've watched him with our own eyes. This guy is an electric player that can really take over a game. Reminds me of kind of like a Percy Harvin, back just with Florida, can just do it all, and really is the top talented guy on the field when you're watching him.
So those three, I think, are similar in terms of what they bring: explosiveness, big playability, return ability, slot, jets, all of those things, the bubble screens. So now we're going to get into one guy who's a little bit different. Terrace Marshall Jr. out of LSU, 6'2", 205, runs a 4.4 40. He was the top wide receiver prospect in his high school class. 23 touchdowns in his last 19 games. In 7 games a year ago, 731 yards, 10 touchdowns, 15 yards per catch. Dane Brugler says he reminds him of Cortland Sutton in that he relies on size and speed, still raw as a technician, but has elite traits. So he's intriguing. He seems like somebody, if you're swinging for the fences, that could develop into a real type of a number one outside guy, but still inconsistent effort and very raw.
Yeah, I would say the one thing that you marry him to what the Browns have done recently in the draft: big stage at LSU, big time performer, big numbers, played games. I mean, those things add up when you look at some of the Browns draft picks in last year's draft and moving forward. But yeah, he's another one where when you look at the mock drafts, if the Browns don't take a swing on him at 26, I don't know where you get him, because it looks like he's been linked to the Ravens right underneath the Browns. So he's someone where if you don't take him at 26, you either got to make a move back up into the first round or make a move high up into the second round probably to get someone like him, because teams do see that. I mean, if you can get a potential number one guy late in the first round or early in the second round, that's a steal.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next guy on the list here, Dyami Brown out of North Carolina. We were talking with Dan Orlovsky on Browns Daily, and he said this is one of my favorite receivers in this entire class. 6 foot, 190, 4.4 40, but he plays faster than his speed on the clock at the 40, because this guy is a home run hitter. a vertical threat, 20 yards per catch over the last 3 seasons, 8 touchdowns of 40 or more yards, back-to-back seasons with over 1,000 yards, 20 yards per catch, and he's averaged 10 touchdowns per season those last 2. First team All-ACC, led the ACC in receiving. They say he's the best double move and vertical receiver in this class. And Dane Brugler says his play style is reminiscent of Stephon Diggs. And remember, Diggs in Minnesota with Kevin Stefanski was excellent. I think he brings that just absolutely electric, take the top off the defense, explosive receiver that could really open things up in this offense. And I think in the second round, I've seen him go in the end of the first round in some mocks. I've seen him go in the third round in some mocks. People either love him or are maybe a little bit less warm on him, but I think Dyami Brown has a chance to be really, really, really special in this offense.
Well, and then when you think about the Browns offense last year, you lose Odell midway through the season, and that kind of takes away your big home run hitter. You think about that week 2 catch against the Bengals, that big deep ball play he had. And then you look back at the second half of the season, the Browns passing offense was obviously incredible and how efficient it was. But you really only had that one kind of double move deep ball with Donovan Peoples-Jones in terms of a field stretching big kind of play. Just think about if you had that consistent threat in this offense with that running game, with Odell and Jarvis running these short and medium routes. I mean, that gives you absolutely everything you would need. So if there's a player that can come in right away and give you that deep ball threat, I think that's what the Raiders thought they were getting with Henry Ruggs last year. Didn't exactly pan out as they had hoped. But you can get that in the second round or even late in the first round. That's something that could really change this Browns offense.
Yeah, Dyami Brown's one to watch. I'm going to try to will him to the Browns in the early third. Maybe the Browns move up there to get him, but I think certainly worthy of a second round pick and has certainly elite traits. So as you see, a lot of receivers, and there are plenty of other names we could have gotten into, but I think a lot of guys that could really offer immediate and long-term help to the Browns at the receiver position, and it's a receiver-rich draft. So I think it'll be real interesting on Friday, day 2 of this draft, to see if the Browns end up calling any of these names that we talked about, because I think there are a lot of intriguing options. For Andrew Gribble, I'm Nathan Zegura saying thanks for joining us in this wide receiver preview edition of the Road to the Draft, presented by P&G and Meyer.